Hey, this is Dr. Mercola, and it's always been surprising to me how even physicians fail to appreciate how important the mouth is and the health of our teeth is to our total health. And if you've been following the site for a while, you know we've been placing a great bit of emphasis on the dangers of mercury in dentistry and how it should be avoided. In fact, there's just no way I think it should ever be indicated or used. You just need to avoid it like the plague because it's a potent neurotoxin. It's a biohazard and it just should not be available. But is this the only problem with having proper dental health? Unfortunately, the sad answer is no. Because if you suffer with a chronic disease, it's really important to understand that there's a factor in your illness that could be a result of root canal surgery. That is because every year in the United States alone, 25 million root canals are done. And nearly every dentist and physician is oblivious to the serious potential health risk that this operation produces. So I'm going to discuss the challenges with root canals. And this is somewhat controversial, but I believe it's important. I've known about this information for about 20 years. Because it's really vital to understand that over 95% of all dentists and physicians do not understand this issue because they have avoided the study of this important research that's been available literally for over 100 years. Fortunately, because I was educated about the dangers of root canal, have been able to avoid all of them in my entire life. And interestingly, shortly after I learned about it, I wound up having an infected tooth that was seriously infected that had to be surgically removed. Now, a traditional dentist, of course, would have done a root canal. Now, the interesting thing, and why I say it's interesting, is that I was about 40 years old at the time, and for my entire adult life up to that point, I suffered with really severe acne, chronic severe cystic acne that I tried everything for. It wasn't getting better. And the moment I had that tooth removed, the acne disappeared. It was like a miracle, which is very interesting. So for me, it made a pretty dramatic, remarkable change in my own health. Now, you might wonder, well, you're Dr. Mercola. How did you get an infected tooth? Well, the challenge is, and really, if you're a parent, you just really have to appreciate and understand this, that the reason you get infected teeth, or sort of the beginning of that, which would be cavities, is because of your diet, as Dr. Price wound up finding through his extensive research. It's all the diet. If you're eating a healthy diet that's really essentially avoids sugars, and I believe many times grains, is full of good vegetables and healthy foods, and you're really avoiding the toxins, you just aren't going to get cavities. And if you look at cultures that are eating really ideal types of diets, you'll see that cavities are almost non-existent in that culture. And that's what happens here. So parents, you really have got to be so good with your kids and really teach them these principles so they can avoid these problems and complications later in life. But getting back to my own experience, I've had 2 additional teeth removed. And what I did initially for the first tooth that was removed, I had a partial put in, and then it was switched to actually a bridge. So I had 2 bridges, and I actually, in my most recent one, I'm in the transition now of actually having an implant, but it's a very special metal called zirconium, which I believe is far better than titanium. Fortunately, I've had an early mentor in this area, and that was a Dr. Tom Stone and a Dr. Douglas Cook, who is a biological dentist up in northern Wisconsin. And they taught me this information about 20 years ago, so I've been able to apply it to my own health personally and have avoided all root canals and recommend that all my friends and family avoid them, and I recommend that you consider avoiding them too. But I'm going to provide you with the information, the material, the knowledge that you'll need to make that informed choice. The pioneer in this work and the toxicity of root canals was actually done by Mayo Clinic and Dr. Weston Price. And this was done, they did this jointly back in about 1910, over a century ago. Now, Dr. Weston Price was known as the world's greatest dentist. He was a researcher, a diligent researcher, and his work was revered by both the dental and medical professions. His work took him around the world, where he studied the teeth, diets, and the bones of native populations living without the benefit of modern food and avoiding essentially all the processed food. So he did 25 years of careful, impeccable research, and he actually led a team of 90 researchers where their findings mark right up there with some of the greatest medical discoveries of the 20th century. Unfortunately, for the most part, his information and the information that he found out has been largely suppressed. Now, this all started because around 1900, Dr. Price had been treating root canal infections, but he became suspicious that these root canal teeth always remained infected, even though he treated them like all the other dental physicians did. So that thought kept preying on his mind, haunting him each time a patient consulted him for some serious debilitating disease for which the medical profession had no answer. Then one day, he recommended that a woman who had been wheelchair bound for about 6 years, that he recommended that she had her root canal teeth or tooth extracted, even though it looked fine. He then removed the tooth from the woman, and he actually implanted it under the skin of a rabbit. And interestingly, the rabbit developed this similar crippling arthritis, and actually in about 10 days the rabbit died. But even more profoundly important is that the patient had a spontaneous remission and her crippling arthritis resolved, which was really quite profound. So Dr. Price came to learn that many chronic degenerative diseases can originate from root-filled teeth. And the most frequent that he found were heart and circulatory diseases. But he also actually found 16 different bacterial agents, and I'll discuss that in a moment, as to that could contribute to that. Now, in Dr. Price's time, it was not easy to actually culture and identify these bacteria. They were actually anaerobes, because the technology did not exist in the 1920s. But most of the bacteria that were reported by organized dentistry at that time were actually reported as anaerobes of unknown origin. But today we have far more sophisticated techniques like DNA analysis, so these bacteria can actually be very specifically identified. So the next most common disease were actually those of the joints, arthritis, and rheumatism. In third place, but almost tied for second, were diseases of the brain and the nervous system, even things like MS. So after that, any disease you can name, for the most part, might have actually had a cause from root canal-filled teeth. And there may have been a correlation between the actual position of the tooth and the acupuncture meridian that it occupied. So a root canal tooth in one area might cause one symptom, where in another area of the jaw could cause another symptom. So Dr. Price learned that primitive tribes with ideal nutrition and avoiding all processed foods had perfect teeth without cavities or gum disease. As soon as these natives, though, started adapting the food to the Western advanced types of diets or the advanced nations, their teeth became deformed, full of cavities. They had gingivitis. They started getting diabetes and all the other diseases of Western nations. So it was obvious to him that human degenerative diseases were fundamentally a nutritional problem. So he discovered that it is mechanically impossible in his process to actually sterilize a root canal tooth. And that's what most dentists believe, that you can physically sterilize this. But Dr. Price learned that it's impossible, and I'll tell you why. And here's where the confusion lies. Because no matter what material or technique Dr. Price used, the root filling shrinks minutely and even microscopically, but it does shrink. And this shrinking sort of protects the inner canals from being sterilized. So this is the key, because of the bulk of the solid appearing tooth, called the dentin, actually consists of miles of tiny tubules. Because, and this is what we know now, but what's taught in most dental schools and what most dentists believe is that a tooth only has 1 to 4 major canals. But what they don't appreciate and is really not taught in dental school, and is never really mentioned, are these accessory canals. And Dr. Price identified as many as 75 separate accessory canals in a single tooth. Now, this is where the issue becomes, because these microscopic organisms, typically aerobic bacteria, reside in these tubules, and they fail to become sterilized because there's essentially 3 miles of these tubules. If you lay them in there, there's 3 miles of them. And when this tooth is sterilized and a root canal is formed, root canal tooth is formed, you create a different environment. And this environment is actually isolated from the normal environment of the body, and as a result of there's no oxygen present, so these normal bacteria which require oxygen sort of mutate and morph to these dangerous anaerobes, and it's bad enough that you have these morphated bacteria, but what happens is that these bacteria produce toxins, and these toxins can be released every time you chew. So what many people fail to realize is that a root canal tooth has no fluid circulating through it. But the maze of these tubules, these 3 miles of tubules, remains, these accessory tubules. So these anaerobic bacteria that live there, they're remarkably safe from any antibiotics. You cannot kill them with even IV antibiotics because there's no way for those antibiotics to reach them. So the bacteria can migrate out into this surrounding tissue where they can sort of hitchhike into other tissues of the body. And the new location can then be any organ, a gland or tissue, and a new colony will be set up where sort of serves as a focus for chronic infections. So one of the things that makes it difficult to understand is that there's a large, relatively harmless bacteria common to the mouth. They change, as I mentioned. They actually morph, and they adapt to these new conditions. So they shrink in size in these cramped quarters. They don't have any the normal oxygen supply, and they morph and they learn to exist and thrive with little food and little oxygen. So those that need oxygen, these aerobic bacteria mutate and they become able to get along without it, essentially changing into these anaerobic bacteria. And in the process of adapting, these formerly friendly, normal organisms become pathogenic, capable of producing disease, bacteria. And they become more virulent, and they produce potentially very serious potent toxins. Now, Dr. Price's important research completely alters the way we must now think about how diseases develop and disappear. Now, these root canal teeth don't affect everyone. This is a concept I want you to understand, because if you have a strong immune system, you may remain in perfect health for many years, maybe even decades after root canal surgery. Dr. Price learned that if you have this strong immune system, it's capable of engulfing the bacteria, these living bacteria, in the infection, so that they sort of stabilize them and prevents them from spreading to other sites. However, once your immune system becomes compromised because of a severe accident, stress, or infection, your immune system can become so compromised that it can develop a degenerative disease because it's unable to control these pathogenic bacteria. So interestingly, there's no other area in medicine where a dead body part is kept in your body. If you have your appendix removed, the surgeon doesn't preserve it and keep it in there. He surgically excises it and removes it. If, God forbid, you were to have frostbite in one of your digits, into your fingers or your toes, now, we certainly would want to keep that toe or that finger, but that's not what happens. If there's a severe infection there, it's amputated. So once a body part dies, no matter how important it is, it's typically removed in the body, except for your tooth. Because sort of the standard of care in dentistry is to keep and preserve tooth structure. And there's an important component to that, because we definitely want to keep our teeth. And if you remove a tooth, you have to do something to address that, because there will be mechanical dysfunction that results from an absence of a tooth, but you don't want to keep a dead tooth in your body. So, and largely because every time when you have a root canal tooth, every time you bite down, these bacteria, these anaerobe bacteria, are flushed into your bloodstream, and they start looking for a new home. And if you have a healthy immune system, this is not an issue. But the moment your immune system becomes compromised, look out, you're having a potential problem. So, creating this permanent abscess in your body with this root canal operation sets you up for some potentially very serious degenerative diseases. So whether these diseases occur shortly after the root canal surgery or they occur much later in life depends again on the health of your system. So Dr. Price actually wrote 2 very incisive books in 1922, and they were nearly 1,200 pages long, about this research, and it covered not only this research but human health and dental conditions that were important enough, so much so that he should have won a Nobel Prize, but unfortunately he didn't. And unfortunately also the American Dental Association denies his findings and claims that they have proven root canals to be safe. However, they have no published data or actual research on this. So his work seems to have been deliberately buried, unread, and unappreciated for about 70 years. At that time, there was an endodontist, and that's a surgeon, a root canal surgeon, by the name of Dr. George Meinig. Dr. Meinig was actually born in my hometown, which is Chicago, and he was born nearly 100 years ago. He moved on and eventually became a captain in the United States Army during World War II, and then moved to California, Hollywood, and became a dentist to the stars. And he practiced root canal therapy there in Hollywood, and he actually taught the subject to others in the dental profession. Now, and eventually became one of the founding members of the American Association of Endodontists, and that's the professional association for root canal therapists, and those are dental physicians. So, however, in the early 1990s, Dr. Meinig developed an association with the Price-Pottinger Foundation, and he spent 18 months of intensive study of the meticulous 25-year root canal research that he found in Dr. Price's book, Dental Infections. And in June of 1993, Dr. Meinig published a book called The Root Canal Cover-Up. This book is still available on Amazon today, and if you want to pursue this topic in more detail, I would strongly recommend that you pick up a copy of that book, because it has really all the specific details and goes into much more detail than I can in this video. So if you're convinced, let me just mention that I would strongly recommend that you not have a root canal therapy. If you have one, let me caution you that there are some specific areas that you need to be concerned about before you actually remove a root canal, because you could make it worse. As I said, I don't believe anyone should ever get a root canal, but if you are considering one, you've got to do your homework on these issues. And you can listen to this video again. You can do Dr. Meinig's root canal book, or you can go back to Dr. Price's original research. So if you have one, you'll still want to consider removing it. Remember, because the moment your immune system starts to crash, the likelihood that you're going to encounter some serious, potentially degenerative disease increases. So basically your options, if you're going to remove it, are really quite simple. You can either have a partial put and made, and then that's a little tooth that you would place in and out. It's partial because it's not a full denture, it's only a partial denture, and it would contain however many teeth that were the root canal teeth, and there's an upper or lower one that you would use. That's the least expensive. It's also the least convenient. The other approach is that you can have what's called a bridge, and a bridge is a little more, considerably more expensive actually, but they have to typically destroy the adjacent teeth and create this bridge, which has looks like a normal tooth, but there's a space underneath it between you and your gum. So, and then you have to regularly floss with that. And the last approach you can use is an implant. And there's some potential problems with implants. The typical one that's used is titanium. One of the concerns is that you have multiple different types of metals in your mouth. So if you have titanium and you still have metal in either a crown or a filling, that metal can actually form a battery with the 2 dissimilar metals, and then that can cause a current that actually exceeds the current in your brain. So you want to be careful about putting that, and that's why my favorite is to use zirconium, but you really need to see a dentist who understands this, who's knowledgeable, who's been trained, in this, and certainly all dentists are trained in the therapy, but they're not trained in the specifics and the concerns about root canal danger. So you really need to see someone who's considered a biological dentistry, and we'll have some links for you on this page to how you can find those dentists. Remember, just pulling your tooth is not enough. Another interesting thing that Dr. Price found is that bacteria in the tissues adjacent to the tooth root canal can also be a problem, because they just don't reside in the tooth. They kind of permeate around the immediate tissue. So dentists are generally taught to remove a tooth and leave the periodontal ligament in the socket. And a procedure which would be similar to delivering a baby and leaving the placenta in the uterus. So most experts now who study this recommend a slow speed drilling with a burr to remove 1 millimeter of the entire bony socket, so you can get rid of all those bacteria, because there's a risk that that bacteria can actually develop a cavitational necrosis. And the purpose is to do this is to remove that periodontal ligament, which seems to always be infected with these toxins and the bacteria. Typically a streptococcus that's living in the dental tubules. Again, the first millimeter is typically removed with a slow drill. So this is in direct contrast to, as I said, what most dentists use and they're taught in dental school, which is to preserve the teeth, to save the teeth, to perform a root canal, to preserve the structure. And they really think they are doing the best they can for you, but they're unaware of the research that Dr. Price did, or if they are aware of it, they're convinced that the American Dental Association knows better and has disproven this when they haven't. So it's really an important topic, and when I was practicing medicine, if a person came in, I would routinely we would look for anyone who's had a root canal. Didn't mean they have to remove it at that time, but it was always a factor that we would consider that could be sort of a hidden variable that we weren't aware of that would prevent the person from really achieving their full highest level of health. So it's really important information to have, and most people are not aware of this, and then hopefully this information will start to spread, and people will be knowledgeable that this could be one of those hidden factors that may be contributing to any degenerative disease that they're having. Because really it's paying attention to details that we all need to have to find out the mysteries so that we can truly take control of our health.